I'm Charlotte McLeod with investingnews.com, and here today with me is Byron King, editor at Paradigm Press, which was formerly Agora Financial. He is a geologist and a longtime newsletter writer who has worked closely with Jim Rickards. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Charlotte. It's great to be with you.
Really good to be catching up with you. I think we crossed paths at PDAC, but we're going to do our catch up here. And definitely there's a lot going on. I know gold was a strong theme at PDAC, and of course it remains a really big topic of interest, trading at or near all-time highs very consistently. So let's start with the gold price, and I'll ask you, has the speed that gold has gotten to this level surprised you at all?
No, not really. We were talking about this, you and I have been talking about this for several years. Last year we spoke, we missed each other at PDAC, just circumstances, and late last year, people were asking me, hey, what do you think about the price of gold? As if I have a crystal ball, but I said, 3,000 by June 30th of 2025. Well, it beat me by a couple of months and, by quite a bit, really. The thing that was driving gold, and we knew this way back when, and I think I said this to you when we spoke the last time, it's been a while, but the big buyers are central banks. As central banks are buying gold, they buy, they don't sell, they buy big amounts. These aren't your little onesie, twosie, 10, 1, 5, 10 ounces of gold, retail, we're not buying coins here, we're buying this stuff by the hundreds of pounds and the tons and such, so that serious demand that was driving the price. Retail has been on the side. When I say retail, I just mean normal investors out there, and even well-heeled family offices. I mean, even really wealthy people. I mean, sometimes some of those people, their idea of buying a lot of gold is $1 million, $2 million, $5 million, or something like that. That's nice. But you're not a central bank, okay? You're not buying central bank levels of gold. Central banks drove the price. Central banks, lifted it up steadily, surely, in the face of all the, the kind of the resistance in kind of the monetary West, which hates gold, by the way, because gold embarrasses them for their mismanagement of their currencies. That we won't go there. But what was driving the price of gold up was central bank purchases of real gold. Now, the lag between gold prices and the gold miners, the people who actually mine this stuff, is the central banks bought gold. They didn't buy mining shares, Okay. Well, but the thing is that what's happening now, today as we speak, as the gold miners are mining their gold and selling it, they're ringing the cash register, and they are racking up unbelievably good profit margins. And so the rest of the stock market investing world, Wall Street, so to speak, Wall Street, Bay Street, whatever, the city of London, they're like, oh, hey, what are these mining companies here making all this money? So now we're starting to see some of that money, flow into the mining shares, as well as on the other side, we've got kind of a technology sell-off. Tesla loses half its value or something like that, $700 billion or whatever in the last couple of months. Some of that money had to go somewhere. If just a little bit of that money goes into the mining sector, man, it's just fireworks. So that's kind of what's going on in terms of the price of gold.
Yeah, I think you've hit on a number of directions already that I want to follow you down, and maybe starting a little bit more about what is driving the gold price right now, because I had in mind to ask you, what's going on here? Is it more to do with those big underlying drivers like the central banks, or are we seeing now more things like the recent headlines around tariffs and that kind of thing start to play in? How would you break that down?
Well, the tariff story, I guess we call it, was very convenient because a lot of people out there, they don't like Trump, and so anything Trump does is bad, and so anything bad that happens has to be Trump's fault. So when they see something weird going on, they say, wait a minute, all that gold, all that physical gold, they're moving it from London to the United States. They're chartering airplanes to fly it. They're putting gold bars in the cargo holds of commercial flights from Heathrow when it's not shut down because of a fire, from Heathrow to North America, and it's Trump because they want to get that money into the United States before Trump puts a tariff on. no, what are you crazy? Are you crazy? Come on. I mean, Trump is very targeted in his tariffs. We can talk about Trump's tariffs, and I hope we do. But do you really think Trump wants to put a tariff on imports of gold bars? Are you kidding? I mean, Trump wants to put tariffs on imports of car parts or tires or auto engines or things like, because he wants to create jobs in the United States building car parts and tires and car engines and stuff like that. But he doesn't care about a tariff on importing gold bars. And Trump, I've never met the guy. I don't work for him, but Trump, I think, would love to have more gold bars in the United States. I think deep down in his monetary DNA, I think Trump's a gold bug. I don't know that. I mean, just talk about, I'm going to go visit Fort Knox and all that. He likes gold, and he understands more about gold than a whole bunch of the last series of U.S. presidents. I mean, I think the last president who maybe understood gold a little bit was Reagan, because he was raised. He was a young fellow in the days of Calvin Coolidge, in the 1920s. I mean, back when the U.S. was still on a real gold standard, but most U.S. presidents don't get gold at all. Trump, I think, gets it more than most. And compared to some of the economic illiterates that we've had as president, in recent decades, you can use your imagination. Trump understands, but no, he's not going to tear up gold. So the whole movement of gold to the U.S. Was not to beat Trump's tariffs. The movement of gold to the U.S. was because, in many, many, many ways, people don't trust, the UK or the Bank of England anymore. We could go down that rabbit hole if you want, but the UK is just self-destructing before our eyes. The Bank of England, could easily, go broke in its own way, and then people in the United States who worry about monetary stability and monetary security, they are they're bringing gold in as well, and as from the standpoint of from an American standpoint, I think it's great. I mean, most Americans don't understand gold. It's been since 1933 when Franklin Roosevelt seized everybody's gold coins. That we've had 92 years of people just not understanding gold anymore, and everybody who used to understand it has died off, and there's just a few left. I mean, Jim Rickards, who you mentioned, I work with him. He was really one of the last academic level trained economists to go through like a gold program when he was at Johns Hopkins. He talks about this, that they actually taught about gold when he was at Johns Hopkins in the early 1970s. But then, by the, and I remember this myself from Harvard, my Harvard days. I mean, they mentioned the word gold, in economics class. I was a geology major, but I took economics class. They mentioned the word gold, but then it was like off to Keynesianism, off to monetarism, things like that. It's all about interest rates, and it's all about kind of monetary voodoo that we live with today.
Okay, really interesting. And I don't want to divert you too much down a pathway here, but tell me a little bit more about this reason for bringing gold into the US and that Bank of England distrust angle, because I've been hearing a lot about how, this is all related to the tariffs, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, again, it's not tariffs. It's that the UK is as a political entity is falling apart. I mean, they've got massive demographic problems. They've got massive, fiscal problems paying their bills. The pound is a historically weak currency. I mean, if you read sort of like deep into the internet discussion, the UK, aside from the fact that they've disarmed everybody, they have no Second Amendment, and nobody has any guns in the UK. I mean, the UK is ready to break apart. I mean, Scotland wants to go this way, and Wales wants to go that way, and England here, and Northern Ireland, you're on your own. They do not control their borders. They do not. It is becoming a very, very poor country. I mean, it is really. I've been there over the years, and my first trip to London as a young guy was, I think it was 1970. Now, and London was London, man. It was like it was cool. It was fun. then you go there for the next, some many years, and it's like it changes. It's like, whoa, what's going on with this place, So as that's kind of the cultural, demographic, sociological view of it. In terms of the monetary side, there are images, videos, photographs of the vault of the Bank of England. They've got all these gold bars there. I remember seeing the late Queen QE2 visiting the Bank of England in the gold vault. Now, that's actually a really nice idea, that you get on there and you take a stroll among the gold bars, to reassure the world. I would, that's why Trump ought to go to Fort Knox, although the vault is much smaller. But you show the people that it's there. But the thing is, just because the gold is there sitting on the shelf doesn't mean it's yours. It might be yours in the sense that you got a guy with a gun, who's going to guard the door. But that gold all has somebody else's name attached to the title certificate. And so I think a lot of people, not just in America but around the world, are repatriating whatever gold they can get out of the London vaults. Gold is going to the Middle East. Gold is certainly going to China. We know that. Coming to America, to the extent that if an American can get those gold bars out of London, get them out now. Because who knows what's going to happen later. When not if, this current monetary global system really, hits the final iceberg, so to speak, and gold, the price of gold will, skyrocket in a way that is going to make it very, very difficult physically to transport the stuff, because nobody's going to know how to value it anymore. You've interviewed our mutual good friend Rick Rule, for example. Rick speaks highly of you, and I know you've talked with him, and I've watched your videos with Rick Rule. Rick likes to say that he's not worried about $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 gold, but he's worried about $10,000 or $15,000 or $20,000 gold because of what it means to the rest of the economy. When gold gets up to those ethereal levels like that, it means that much of the rest of the economy is going to go nuts. Instead of $4 a gallon for gasoline, it's going to be $24 or $40 for a gallon of gasoline instead of $5 for a gallon of milk at the grocery store. It's going to be $50 for a gallon of milk if there's a gallon of milk on the shelf for you to buy. So again, that gets into some very it goes down a dark path, and the problem is that this isn't just gloom and doom, fear mongering and all that. The problem is that the world is on a dark pathway, in so many ways. War in Ukraine, maybe war in the Pacific, war, definitely there's kinetic war in the Middle East. For sure, from Israel, Yemen, what's going on with Iran. There's a fear trade going on. So anybody who can get their hands on some gold, some physical gold, bring it home, put it in the safe, put it in the vault, put it wherever. If you're the central bank, or if you're just Joe investor out there, Susie investor, if you don't have any gold, get some, silver as well. But if you don't have it, get some. And if you do have it, just you make sure you don't forget the combination to your safe, or make sure you remember where you buried it, out in the backyard, or dropped it in the lake in your plastic tubes or something.
Yeah, that's definitely very important. And that's one of my favorite, I think, Rick Rule quotes there. And I like to remind myself of that when I start to maybe get too excited when I see the price going up, is okay, what else is going on in the world to make that happen? And, you mentioned the Queen walking through the vaults, looking at all this gold. I have one more question on that note, because I know that people are thinking about, you mentioned the Fort Knox audit as well, and Trump should go in there and take a look. But people have that concern there as well, is okay, maybe the gold is there, but whose is it? Do you have worries about that?
Absolutely. I am deeply, deeply concerned about it. The very the DNA of Fort Knox, the very, very beginning of Fort Knox is has led to a problematic view of what's inside the walls there, what's behind the wire. In 1933, one of the very, very first things that Franklin Roosevelt did was executive order everybody in America, turn in your gold coins. Every person, every business, every bank, everything, every church, give it all. You can keep a few little monetary numismatic coins, but if you don't turn it in, you're going to jail. So what happened after that? Well, within a couple of months, the U.S. government had, vaults filled with bags of gold coins, little gold coins. What do you do with that stuff? How do you keep track of it? Okay. So, politics is what it is. So let's melt it all down. So literally they just poured these gold coins into the melting pot, melted them down, and they poured these 400-ounce bars of gold. And they're about like 25-pound bars of gold. And they are not, now to the extent that some of those gold bars are still around, many of them are still around, in fact, they are the metallurgy of the gold coins from 1933. So it's about 90-some% gold with some copper, a little bit of silver, and some kind of whatever other trace metals were in the coins back at the time, because they weren't the metallurgy in what made those coins in the 1890s and early 1900s. The metallurgy wasn't what we have today, So anyhow, so those gold bars are what they are. So they went into Fort Knox, which was built in a crash program in I think 1936, I believe. They built it inside of a year, which is just pretty amazing, with government work. Wow, okay, I'm impressed, and it wasn't really built to show off the gold. It was really built as a place to just stash the bars, So theoretically, the bars are all stashed in there real tight. It's very, very logistically difficult to get in there, even if you're allowed in, which nobody is, except for a few people who work for the U.S. Treasury or whatever. But I mean, if you want to audit Fort Knox, somebody literally has to form a bucket brigade. Like, here's a gold bar, I'll give it to you. Here's a gold bar, I'll give it to you. And they have to pass those bars out. And to the extent they have serial number, you got to look at the serial number, which and you weigh it and you assay it and you do some tests on it to make sure that it is what it is, and so that's just physically to count and assay the bars would probably take 2 years, and then we get to this issue of who owns it? Is it really the United States government's gold or not? Because a lot of the gold that's in there went in there during World War II. That was British gold. There was even Soviet gold, because the Soviets paid for a Lend-Lease during World War II with gold bars. I mean, they literally shipped gold bars to the United States, which wound up at Fort Knox. South Africa, huge mining country, then and now, but even more so then. They didn't stop mining gold during World War II. They mined gold, but what did they do with it? They didn't just keep it in South Africa. They actually sent a lot of South African. So what's inside Fort Knox? Well, the two great questions. What do we have? What alien technology do we have in those tunnels out in Area 51 in Nevada that we captured from the space alien? And the other one, what's inside Fort Knox? Well, there will be gold bars. Will there be exactly what the Treasury says? I don't know. I mean, good luck. And it'll take us a couple of years to find out if you really want to know. And in that regard, just moving the bars is a logistical nightmare. And to the extent, once you pull those bars out, you may as well just have a mobile furnace, sitting there in the parking lot of the of Fort Knox depository, just melting it down and, cleaning up that gold and, repouring, 0.9999 good bars out of it, clean it up. But am I worried about what's inside Fort Knox? Absolutely, yes. Because even though the U.S. government says, oh, we don't worry about gold, I mean, if all the gold was at the bottom of Lake Superior, would it really matter? If a ship sank with all the gold, would it? Who cares? It's just, because we're on our monetary system, and so the good faith and credit of the United States is behind it all, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, they say that. Okay, they say that, but really, deep in their hearts, they know that if word got out that there is some problem with the gold in Fort Knox, if there is a problem with the gold in Fort Knox, that the U.S. dollar would crash overnight, and we'd have that $25 gallon of gas, and we'd have that $50 gallon of milk. So.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating topic, and we'll have to keep an eye and see if that audit or the Trump walkthrough actually happens. I'm a little disappointed there hasn't been any follow-up yet, but I guess Trump and Elon have other things on their mind right now.
Yeah, they're bombing Yemen, so I mean that keeps them busy, but yeah, it's I mean he should go there, make the time to go there. Frankly, I don't know. I learned long ago, bad news doesn't improve with age, and and Trump is fresh enough in office. He's still in this. He's in like the second he's in the third month of being in office. January, February. It's the end of March. He's new enough in office that he can wash his hands of a lot of bad things and say, look, this is what I inherited. But after a while, Biden's problem becomes Trump's problem. Biden's war in the Ukraine becomes Trump's war in the Ukraine. Biden's inflation becomes Trump's inflation. After a while, people get tired of you pointing fingers at somebody else. But he should jump in the jet and he should go there and they should open the doors. He loves the TV camera, so you know that. Just go down there and just look, open the vault, that big 21-ton vault door or whatever it is. Open the thing up and look in there, and obviously like I said, it'd take 2 years to audit the stuff. It's not like he's going to do that, but he should at least go there to say, there it is, and then let the technical experts, dig in on it. If Trump wants to get interest rates down, if Trump wants to, kind of calm the waters of the economy, I actually think a visit to Fort Knox, a successful visit to Fort Knox. Don't open the door and it's empty. That's bad television, okay? And he understands bad TV. Go to Fort Knox, look in there, and just see. There it is. There's your gold bar, and take it from there. He doesn't take my advice, though. He never calls. I don't get it.
Yeah, you're right, though. He likes good TV. That would be good TV. So we'll keep an eye on that. And speaking of things that Trump has been busy with, you mentioned we should probably talk a little bit more about the tariffs. So tariffs, a little bit difficult to talk about because they are changing from day to day, maybe from hour to hour. I know right now it's the auto tariffs that are in focus. Looking toward April 2nd, I believe we've got those reciprocal tariffs scheduled to come in. So what is your view on the overall situation? Is this something that could de-escalate, or are we headed toward more bigger trade war concerns here?
Well, okay, boy, this is a hot nerve kind of point here. When I was in, I'm an American, live in the USA. I was up in Toronto during PDAC, and I remember going down to the convention center, and I took an Uber, or I guess it was an Uber, taxi or an Uber, and the guy had the radio on, and it was local Toronto news. And oh man, whoever it was, the talk radio people, they were just slamming Trump. Oh, tariffs on Canadian goods, tariffs on this. How could he do that? How could he do that? And my taxi driver is like, what do you think about those tariffs? And I'm like, oh God, I don't even want to talk about this. I don't want you to drive us into a telephone pole or something. As somebody who works a lot with Canadians, and I've been working with Canadians for a long time. Back both geologically and even in my Navy days. I work very, very closely with the Canadians, and I remember the great, fabulous old days of Ronald Reagan and Brian Mulroney. I actually met Brian Mulroney once at some embassy. I was in the Navy. I was working with the Canadians. Somehow or another, I got on the invite list to the Canadian embassy for a Christmas party, and Brian Mulroney was there, and I met him. And they introduced me as, this young guy here. He helps us with our F-18s, and keep them flying. I'm like, yeah, okay, great. I was helping to keep the Canadian Forces airplanes, spare parts and air-to-air missiles and stuff like that. Long story, but I thought that was fabulous, and out of Reagan Mulroney came the first Canadian American free trade agreement, and that was in the late '80s, early '90s. CAFTA, Canadian America Free Trade Agreement, and I thought that was fabulous back then. This was made, but then that morphed into NAFTA, North American, with Mexico added, and then as the '90s unfolded, I'm throwing some history here. Sorry. As the '90s unfolded, this place called China became China became China Inc. They just built every kind of factory you can imagine, and that big sucking sound you heard. Ross Perot was talking about it in the 1992 election. The big sucking sound would be U.S. jobs going to Mexico. Well, the next big sucking sound was U.S. jobs going to China. So along comes Trump, and he tours the country, and he gets elected by these people. They're called voters. Voters. They vote out in voterland. And there's a lot of voters out in voterland who live in a town or they live in a region where there used to be a big industry, a big factory, a big mill, big mine, big complex or whatever, and it's closed, and their kids are dying of fentanyl, and their kids are, people have no hope, Yes, I mentioned earlier, the UK is becoming a poor country. The United States is a relatively poor country too, in so many ways. I mean, yeah, we have a lot of rich people, and they live in their gated communities, and they do very well. But I travel a lot, in my job, geology, just get out in the field, driving around. Everything. There's a lot of poor people in the United States, and they voted, and Trump's in office, and his promise to them was, "I'm going to bring you back jobs." Well, how do you do that? Well, how do we get the factory back here? How do we get the mill back here? Okay, well, tariffs is one way to do it. Is what he's doing, is it fair? Is it right? Is it a good thing? I mean, we want to build ships in America. We want to rebuild the Navy. You build ships with steel. So you put 25% tariffs on steel from Canada? I don't know. I feel bad for the steel workers in Hamilton. I feel, why can't they, just keep doing their thing, and we trade back and forth. So as far as what are the tariffs going to do, I think he's very serious about certain targeted tariffs, and they're going to happen. Steel, aluminum, auto parts for sure. I mean, he won the state of Michigan, Wisconsin. They make auto parts. They're Indiana, Northern Ohio. I mean, lots of auto part plants there. And he make it in the U.S. And in the first 2 months of his office, he's got something like, what's the number? Something like $3 trillion of investment commitments, from ostensibly global companies. But I mean, Honda, Hyundai, various other auto companies. They're going to build plants in the U.S. So he is $3 trillion. That's 10% of the U.S. GDP in the first 2 months of commitments to capex in the United States. So the tariffs have definitely, changed the landscape. They've changed the investment landscape. They've become a source or a draw, you might say, for foreign capital, into the United States. Invest here, build a plant here, et cetera, et cetera. The fights that we see over, we're not going to, import your Kentucky bourbon, or we're not going to import your California wines. Okay, yeah. I feel bad for the Kentucky bourbon makers, the California vintners. At the same time, let me say to my Canadian friends, you guys have a lot of tariffs yourselves. Look in the mirror. That wake up tomorrow morning, take a good hard look in the mirror, and ask yourself, how many tariffs do we have on U.S. items? More than people know. There's a long list, and the Europeans are even worse. The Europeans, the EU is even worse. And again, another crazy angle. When Keir Starmer was in visiting Trump not too long ago, Trump offered the United Kingdom a free trade agreement, and for some bizarre reason, Starmer turned it down. It had to do with come on board with us with solving the Ukraine war. And Starmer wouldn't do it. I mean, how do you turn down a free trade agreement with the United States? If certainly if you're the United Kingdom, I mean, come on, that guy's nuts for walking past that. And so your question was, what about tariffs? They're going to happen. They're going to be targeted. It's going to be things that are visible, like metals, aluminum, steel, copper, even, because Trump wants to see development in the United States. He wants U.S. to develop copper mines in Arizona and Alaska and other places. I've spent years of my newsletter writing life covering Canadian companies, and there's so many wonderful Canadian companies that I've dealt with in Quebec and Ontario. All the provinces. The Yukon. I love the Yukon. That we've talked about Yukon companies in the past. So that's at least in like the short to medium term. The long term is, we're on this continent together. You're Canada. Don't worry. You're not going to be the 51st state. Frankly, we don't want you as the 51st state. We like you as Canada. You don't want to be us, and we don't want to be you. But we do want to be the long, deep friends that we've been for a long time. So that's my geopolitical analysis.
Okay. So that's the take on tariffs. I think I've got one more
Sure.
follow up on tariffs, which is about the inflation angle. So there's a lot of talk about whether these tariffs are going to be inflationary. And of course, we've got the Fed that's kind of got its tenuous control over inflation at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Trump would like to see lower interest rates. How do you see this panning out?
Oh, that's also a good question. I mean, the idea that you put tariffs on imported aluminum means that something like a Ford F-150 truck, which has an aluminum body, the price goes up. Or, aerospace grade aluminum, the price for Boeing goes up, or the price for Lockheed to build, F-35s goes up. Yeah, that's an angle of inflation. Another thing, though, that happens is that, suppose you put a 25% tariff on, let's just say, pick a country, Canada, and let's say that the Canadian dollar declines by some amount because of the trade war with the U.S. Well, all of a sudden, the 25% isn't really the 25%. I was just following some economic data from China, which has some new tariffs on it, and producers in China are really screaming because their buyers in the U.S. are saying, "Listen, guys, we have this 20% tariff, on your product here. You need to lower your price to us." Now, the Chinese companies, the Chinese factories, are saying, "Oh, we're already giving you for you best price, lowest price possible." But then the American buyers are like, "No, hey, drop it down," and so the Chinese yuan will deteriorate. The tariffs will adjust in terms of the currency values, the exchange rate values, and to the extent that prices for certain things go up in the United States, people will buy fewer of them, and life will go on. Will the basics matter? Will the price of eggs go up? No, actually, the price of eggs are going down. Will the price of milk go up? No, price of milk is going down. How about the price of gasoline? Price of gasoline is going down in America. Will the price of other things that that we can control in the United States, will they go up? That's just, it is what it is. Airlines are selling fewer seats right now, so airline tickets are actually going down. So everything comes out in the wash, But I suspect that that Trump's tariffs will not be the inflationary kick that a lot of people think. I think it'll be more moderate than you think, and then that feeds into the whole interest rate argument. What will the Fed do with interest rates? Trump is already kind of at war with the Fed. He doesn't like this Fed. He has his own people he wants to put in there, and that's a whole nother story in terms of what are going to happen to interest rates. Trump's a real estate guy. Real estate guys love low interest rates. The U.S. national debt needs low interest rates because when you have $37 trillion national debt, the difference between a 5% bond rate or a 4% or 3.5%, that's huge money when it comes to paying out the interest on the debt. We, United States of America, U.S. Treasury, are in the process right now of rolling over some ungodly huge amount of the national debt in the next 18 months. Out of that $37 trillion national debt, something like 28 trillion of it is going to roll in the next 18 months. And if it rolls at a higher rate, the U.S. interest payments are just going to go through the roof. And so the country cannot, the Treasury, the country, and the country behind the Treasury cannot afford in any way to let those rates drift up. And I think the preference is to, get the rates down. So.
Yeah. I think that seems like it's going to be how it pans out. And I was wrong. I've got one more question on the tariffs. And I'm hoping we can go back and take a little bit more of a look at copper, because it's kind of an interesting situation where it's not tariffs yet. It's this Section 232 investigation, which maybe people remember from uranium a few years ago. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious to get your take on how we might see that pan out. I was seeing headlines today that make it seem even like he wants to speed up this process.
Mm-hmm. Well, copper is doing very well. We're in that $5 a pound range for copper, and I think that the future of copper is really kind of supply driven, in the sense that we've got a tighter and tighter and tighter supply coming out of the ground globally, and the demand is there. Whether it's the developed world, whether it's the U.S., Canada, Europe, Japan, Australia, whether it's the Western world, or whether it's the rest of the world that is developed, they need copper. China needs copper. Everybody needs copper. Africa needs copper. Everybody wants electric lights. Everybody wants microwave ovens, refrigerators, air conditioners, all that stuff. And so, tariffs or not, the tariffs are a distraction to the fundamental story of copper, which is that looking ahead, there's not enough of it coming out of the ground, and the demand for it is growing. And so, a good copper deposit and a good copper, play, whether it's a real live big time copper miner, whether it's Freeport McMoran, nothing wrong with that. BHP, anybody that does big copper, whether it's a intermediate sized company, whether it's we get into these juniors that we don't want to talk about because those are the newsletter portfolio companies. We don't want to give those away, but a good copper play, a very advanced developer that's moving into production is a fabulous investment right now. And anything can happen in the world economy. I mean, where there could be a war, there can be a market crash, all that kind of stuff. But in terms of what are the trends? The trend is your friend with copper. And so copper is strong and getting stronger. Supply demand fundamentals really they trump the tariffs. To use Trump in it, like small t Trump, not big T Trump. But yeah. The supply demand is way more important right now than any tariff Trump could put on any copper that shows up at the Port of Houston or Port of Long Beach.
Okay. I think that's really useful and a good reminder not to get too caught up in these exciting headlines. So for copper then, I think for a long time I've been hearing that supply demand dynamics look really good, but it's a longer term story. So has this possibly accelerated the copper timeline? Is now the time, if you want to get into copper, should you do that now?
Well, I don't think it's a bad time to get into copper now at all, because copper is just is another of the hard assets. You've got gold, you've got silver. Copper is right behind. I mean, in a metallurgical sense, in a periodic table sense, copper, silver, gold. I mean, these are all very, very atomically similar in nucleus, electrons, all electron structure, and just their usefulness. It's just that copper is a lot more abundant than gold and silver. I mean, you can, you can make, you could wire your house with gold, or you could wire your house with silver wire, but you don't, because it's too expensive. But you wire your house with copper wire. So yes, this is a good time to be get into copper as the general monetary problems in the world get worse, and they are getting worse. Whatever Trump does, whatever everybody else does, they are getting worse. People are moving into hard assets. Hard assets meaning, things like copper. So yeah, it is not a bad time at all. I mean, if you try to time it, you'll probably time it wrong. It's never wrong to right. I say it's never wrong. It's not a bad time right now to get in before the big rush. I mean, well, yeah, you kind of missed this part of it already. Okay, this part has already happened, but there's still a whole lot of this left. So get in here. Don't wait till it's way up there. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that provides some good context on copper. And then I also want to make sure we touch a little bit more on the gold stocks as well, because I think we mentioned our last conversation was quite a while ago. And at the time, we were still waiting. I think you're telling us, we have to wait and see the higher gold price be reflected in the gold miners' results, and then they'll start to get that broader attention. So I want to check in on that. Of course, the gold price is now being reflected in those results. So to what extent are the gold companies getting that generalist, broader attention right now?
Oh, well, big names are easy for, the big funds and the big money managers to roll into. I mean, it's kind of like the old saying, nobody ever got fired for using IBM. Right about now, nobody's going to get fired for buying, Barrick or Newmont, something like that. A lot of people have moved into, I'll give you another name, a really nicely run company, Kinross, KGC, with, it's big, it's extensive, it's all over the place. It's making money really, big time, really nice earnings, nice bottom line, nice margins, and oh golly, Agnico Eagle. I mean, AEM. There are some great companies out there that are showing it on the bottom line. Because when their costs haven't gone up that much. I mean, the price of oil, price of diesel fuel, is moderated. Everybody has problems. Price of labor, price of food for the canteen, price of tires for the trucks, and blades for the Caterpillar equipment, all that kind of stuff. The whole supply chain is really, it's tight and it's expensive, and there's definitely inflation in the supply chain. But when you're selling $3,000 gold and not $2,000 gold or $1,800 gold, you are outpacing those cost increases. So a lot of gold miners are definitely worth looking at in terms of what's on their bottom line.
Yeah, and just a follow-up question there. So we see these big companies, they're doing well, the results are coming in, share prices are moving. I know a lot of investors are looking down the food chain and they wonder, when will those smaller companies start to move? And we don't need to mention names, but just curious to get your thoughts on when, I guess, a broader gold stock rally might start to happen.
When will it happen? My view of the smaller names is that it would be nice to see a sector rally where like everybody goes up. The rising tide lifts everybody's boat. But in terms of the smaller names, you want to get into stock picking. And not just one stock or two or three. You want to have like 10 or 12. You want to put some money into each of them, because you never know which one's going to come up with the drill hole that just blows people's, eyeballs. It's just, wow, look at that, I'll mention a small company, except it's a big company. Look at Snowline, for example. Snowline up in the Yukon. They are an advanced explorer, and they are far away from everything and the roads and everything, but they're super well run, and their ore body is absolutely massive. It's just unbelievably ungodly big. And every time they drill a hole, it's, they're pulling gold out of the, when I say they're pulling gold indications, out in the rock. Sometimes there's visible gold. And they typically end in mineralization, and they only stop drilling because, they ran out of drill pipe, or they okay, well, this was going to be an 800 meter hole, and we drilled 800 meters. And, you look at a company like that. They went from just your basic Canadian junior out in the middle of, the bushwhack of Northeast Yukon, to a massive market cap, and it's up near $1 billion. I didn't look at it lately, but it's huge, and they, somebody's going to come along and just buy them on spec, kind of like how, what was it, Great Bear in Red Lake got bought, and because there's just so much resource there. Somebody's gonna come along. Now you say, well, gee, Snowline, that's kind of a pricey share now. Yeah, but there are some other companies out there that are, they're Snowline wannabes, and they're Snowline 2Bs perhaps. Snowline without the share price rocket ride yet, and those are the ones that you want to have in your portfolio of 10 or 12 names, and with Paradigm, I got to give it now since we're talking Paradigm Press, Paradigm Press Group, ParadigmPressGroup.com, something like that. We have, through the Jim Rickers franchise, we cover gold, silver, other mining plays, whatever. We've got some ideas for you out there, and in fact, I'm working even, when I finished here, I'll get back to working on it. I'm working on a project that's going to be, I want to talk about 20 baggers. I mean, in my past, in my newsletter writing past, I've done what I call 20 baggers, where you buy them at at some number and, 20 times, 20x. Those kind of 20 baggers will change your life, I mean, $5,000 becomes $100,000. You pay some college tuitions with that. So, but don't think it's just going to be one stock. You need to put it into like 10 or 12, spread it around, and then go with the guys that start pulling it out of the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm hearing more and more that people need to really do their research and not bet on this across the board game. Like, that's not the way to do it at this time. So I think that helps a lot, probably with people's strategy. And before I let you go, I want to touch on maybe a fun topic that relates to many of the other things that we've been talking about, which is critical minerals. So I know that you love to look at gold, silver, copper, those kind of more basic ones, but you're also out there looking at things that people might not be so aware of. But critical minerals, they're really coming into the spotlight right now with all the tariffs and countries looking inside themselves for their supply chain. So what is on your radar right now? What stands out to you?
Well, I'm glad you asked. Do you have another hour here? No, okay, quickly. The other side of American tariffs is foreign embargoes, okay? Because we, United States, we can tariff anybody we want. But then on the other side, if they get mad at us, they'll say, well, we're going to embargo shipments of XYZ to you. China has done this. I mean, they've embargoed, gallium, germanium, which are critical in the semiconductors. They've embargoed tungsten, which is absolutely critical for machine tools, for defense applications, things like that. They've embargoed antimony, or antimony, as the British call it. I call it antimony because that's how I learned it. Which you say, well, what do you use antimony for? Well, it's a fire suppressant, but it's also the substance that goes into ammunition primers. If you want to make bullets, rounds, if you want to make, rockets that go zoom through the sky, you need antimony in your propellant mixture or your fuel mixture. Who produces most of the world's antimony? China. Who produces most of the world's, tungsten? Russia or China. Who's number two? Well, Russia, the same thing. Yeah. Who's number three? Oh, North Korea, people like that. I mean, how much of that stuff do we produce in the United States of America? Real easy number, 0. There are antimony deposits, there are tungsten deposits, but they're not up and running. Are there antimony and tungsten deposits in Canada? Absolutely. I can tell you that one of the very, very, very best tungsten deposits, for example, is in right at the border of the Yukon and the Northwest Territories. People who follow this will know which company I'm talking about, but I'm not going to give it away. But it's a very well-run company that, good name. And, we have that. Then we get into the rare earth side of it. The rare earth, is for the magnets. It's those 17 rare earth minerals or elements. 17 rare earth elements on the periodic table, and they have all the secret to them is the electron structure of the atom. There's a thing called an f orbital on the outside, and the f orbital has all sorts of room for electrons, and those electrons do absolute magic in terms of magnetism, phosphorescence, electronic properties, and other physical properties. The physicists call it field effects. And who dominates the rare earth space? Well, China, because they are the low price point of everything. They have killed profitability in that whole sector, all for the sake of coming up with, being the guys to go to for the material. They've made it so economically unattractive for anybody else to even try to compete against them. I mean, even though people in the West do try to compete against them, we have some names, but they control. China controls the price points on this stuff, and the rare earth elements are absolutely critical for strong permanent magnets. Magnets are they're the key to not just electric cars, but I mean, even if you have a gasoline powered car out there, the little motors that raise and lower the windows, that move your seat around, that raise and lower the steering wheel, all that stuff, all those little motors have strong permanent magnets in them. Or if you have a hearing aid, or if you have what earbuds, you walk down the street and listen to my music, walking down the street, those little earbuds, they got strong magnets in them, and no rare earths. You got no earbuds, you got no hearing aid, you got no electric motors in your car. Windshield wipers won't work. Let alone the EVs. Where you can go from 0 to 60 in 2.5 seconds or something, whatever they're advertising. So, like I said, the flip side of tariffs is that that somebody else in this world, not the United States of America, certainly not Donald Trump, controls certain critical materials, and they're called critical materials for a reason, because they're critical. And you say, well, can't we mine them and do it ourselves? Yeah, but it takes forever to do it. I mean, this is on my desk right here. I didn't know you were going to ask this, but I always have this. This is a crystal of monazite, beautiful crystal. Frankly, I would never throw this into the crusher because it's crystallographically beautiful, and I'd probably get $500 for it at the Tucson Gem and Mineral Show. But this monazite is one of the most common ores of to get rare earths from, and so where do we get monazite from? Well, you can find it around the world, but it's in mineral sands. I mean, there's a lot in South America, Africa, Russia. I mean, there's some in the U.S. But not enough. Tell you what, I'm gonna give your viewers one last sort of good deal here. If you're looking for a company that's just in the right space, for something like that, look for Energy Fuels Company. Energy Fuels, U 4 U's, and they operate different areas, but they have a facility in Blanding, Utah, which is you go to Utah in like the southeast corner, like near the Four Corners region. They have a facility that processes uranium ore. That's always good. Nothing wrong with uranium. And they can pull vanadium out of it. Vanadium is a steel alloying agent. And then they have a circuit for rare earths, and they can take monazite. Not that I would ever throw, like I said, I would never give them this crystal to throw in the crusher. They use monazite sand, which they buy from other places. But it's a really well-run company. And if you just want to have a nice hip pocket play for uranium and rare earths, some vanadium thrown in there, Energy Fuels, I'll give that one away. It's one of my favorite companies. Really well-run company, wonderful management, great people. The technical skills at the plant level are fabulous. I mean, I had a tour there from a young guy who was a chemical engineer from BYU, and we spent all afternoon just talking chemistry and talking metallurgy. And at the end, I said, "Oh man, you are a national asset. Drive carefully." And he smiled. So but there's hope out there. Don't give up hope. But in terms of many things, the United States has let its economy, its industrial economy, run down really, really badly over many, many years, many decades. It's generational, multi-generational, and it tells you that there's a political process problem in the country. I mean, that's beyond our discussion here today. But and then along comes Trump, and he points it out, and everybody hates him for it. So it's like, okay, whatever. If we kept going the way we were going, we'd already be, flying through the air off a cliff, but at least we're trying to steer the car away from the edge of the cliff, so.
Yeah. And hopefully that is possible. Thank you for going into the critical minerals angle. I think it's really interesting, and it does tie into a lot of the things we've been talking about today. And I never knew that monazite could be so beautiful. So I like the show and tell as well.
Oh, I love doing show and tell. Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah. It's amazing what those little atoms do when they decide to line up. What's the social life of atoms? How do they join with each other and bond with each other? They have these little crystallographic features about them. And, so anybody out there who's looking for something to do for their kids or their grandkids or something, tell them to study chemistry, take some geology courses, a mineralogy course. And, kind of, if you understand stuff like this, you probably have a job for the rest of your life,
Yeah, I think very true. So I will let you go, but before I do, any final thoughts that you would want to share with investors? I know we've covered quite a bit of ground.
Well, the takeaway point is that, the dollar is in big trouble. We have legacy inflation, and the U.S. dollar has really been mismanaged by the people who, have control over it. Sanctions against Russia basically taught Russia how to live outside of the dollar. The rest of the world's looking at Russia saying, well, if they can live outside the dollar, so can we. We could wake up one morning, everybody, you, me, everybody, we could wake up one morning to a currency crisis. We mentioned earlier that, visiting Fort Knox, there'd better be some gold in Fort Knox, because if there isn't, that will absolutely deflate, confidence in the U.S. dollar, the U.S. government. So while the Titans clash, in their own big way, we out here, and is what F. Scott Fitzgerald called the dark fields of the Republic. You just have to live our life, So live your life, look after yourselves, look after your family, get some gold, get some silver, invest in, some good mines and miners and oil companies with oil in the ground, and take it from there.
Okay, I think that's a very nice note to wrap up on. So thank you so much for coming on to go through this pretty wide-ranging discussion. Although I feel like there's still a lot to say, but we'll cover that next time, hopefully.
Next time, hopefully, absolutely. Thank you.
Of course. And once again, I'm Charlotte McLeod with investingnews.com, and this is Byron King with Paradigm Press.
Thank you for watching. If you like this video, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. We'd also love to hear your thoughts, so leave us a comment below.